Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the Midnight Library. Tonight, I will be reading you a story from NoSleep. User AskU10688. The Chapel in the Pines. I was 11 years old the first time I heard the bells. It was late summer, that liminal space between childhood freedom and the creeping dread of school. My older brother Carter and I had spent the afternoon throwing rocks into the creek behind our house. The sun was setting, the sky bleeding pink and gold through the trees. When the sound floated through the woods, soft at first, like wind chimes in the distance, growing louder, more distinct. Church bells. Carter stopped mid-throw. "Do you hear that?" I nodded. The bells rang slow and solemn, like something out of a funeral. "There's no churches out here," Carter said. He was right. Our town, Stony Creek, was tiny, just a scattering of houses, a diner, and a gas station. The nearest church was over 15 miles away, and even that one hadn't used its bell in years. But the sound wasn't coming from town. It was coming from the woods. "Maybe it's the wind," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. Carter turned towards the trees, squinting. He was 14 and braver than me. But even as he hesitated before saying, "Let's check it out," I didn't want to, but I wasn't about to let my older brother call me a wuss. So I followed him. We pushed through the undergrowth, moving deeper into the woods. The bells grew louder. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic, like a heartbeat. Then we saw it, a chapel, nestled among the pines. It shouldn't have been there. We'd explored these woods our whole lives and never seen so much as an old foundation. But there it was, a small wooden building, its paint peeled and gray with age. A steeple jutted towards the sky, its iron bell swinging, though there was no wind. Carter crept closer, but I grabbed his arm. "We should go back," I whispered. He shook me off. "It's just an old church." Before I could stop him, he pushed open the heavy wooden door. It groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Inside the chapel smelled of damp wood and something else. Something rotten. The pews were old but intact, arranged in neat rows leading up to the altar. Stained glass windows lined the walls. But instead of saints or biblical scenes, they were just swirling, chaotic patterns, like someone had shattered the glass and rearranged it without thought. At the front of the chapel, where a cross should have been, stood a statue. It was a figure in a robe, tall and thin, its face obscured by a carved hood. The robe's sleeves stretched long, almost touching the ground, and its hands, oh God, its hands, were too many. Not just two, but a tangle of them, fingers long and clawed, reaching outward like it was beckoning. My stomach twisted. Carter stepped towards it. "Don't," I said, but he ignored me. He reached out and touched the statue's outstretched fingers. The moment his skin met the stone, the bell stopped. The silence was worse. Then the whispers started. They came from everywhere and nowhere, slipping through the cracks in the walls, curling around my ears. Low voices, murmuring words I didn't understand. Carter stumbled back, his face pale. "We need to go," he said, his voice shaking. For once I didn't argue. We ran. We didn't stop until we were out of the woods, gasping for breath. The chapel was gone. When we turned back, there was nothing but trees. That night, Carter got sick. At first it was just a fever, but then came the dreams. He woke up screaming, clutching his arms, his chest, his neck, like something was touching him. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. He said they were watching him, whispering to him, that he could still hear the bells. 2 weeks later, he was gone. The official story was that he ran away. They never found his body. But I know the truth. I heard him leave that night. I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. At first, I thought maybe it was Dad coming home late from the factory. Then I heard footsteps in the grass. Soft but hurried. I pulled back the curtain and saw Carter, barefoot and in his pajamas, walking towards the woods. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like something was pulling him forward against his will. I wanted to call out to him, but when I opened my mouth, I couldn't make a sound. My throat was locked tight, like something was squeezing it. I watched helplessly as he disappeared into the trees. And then, just for a second, I saw the figure standing at the tree line. Tall, hooded, too many hands. It reached for him, and Carter didn't even flinch. He just kept walking, and then they were gone. I told my parents everything the next morning. They didn't believe me. Nobody did. The town came together for a search, combing the woods for days. They found nothing. No footprints, no clothes, not even a trace of his scent for the dogs to follow. Eventually people stopped looking, stopped talking about it, but I never did. I started researching. I spent hours in the library, digging through old town records, legal legends, anything that could explain what I saw. There was nothing about a chapel in the woods, but I did find something else. Stories. Stories about people disappearing in Stony Creek. Not a lot, just one every few decades. A child here, a teenager there. Always the same pattern. No struggle, no signs of a body. Just gone. And the ones who saw them last, they always claimed they heard the bells. It was an old legend, passed down in whispers. The Watcher in the Pines. Some said it was a ghost, others a demon. A few of the older folks, the ones who still clung to the old ways, said it was an angel. Not the kind that saved you, though. The kind that took you. Some doors, the librarian told me one afternoon, her voice barely above whisper, aren't meant to be opened. The Watcher in the Pines, she said, eyes darting to the darkened window of the library. You should leave it alone. But I couldn't. Not after Carter. Not after what I saw. I kept digging, even when I knew I shouldn't. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Stony Creek had a history, one that no one liked to talk about. I found old newspaper clippings in the library archives, yellow and brittle, tucked away like someone had tried to forget them. There was Charlie, a 12-year-old boy, who vanished in 1953 after telling his mother he was going to meet the preacher. They found his shoes by the creek, but not him. Anna Mae, 16, disappeared in 1972. She had told friends she heard music in the woods, that she wanted to find where it was coming from. No one ever saw her again. And then there was Daniel, gone in 1991. He told his little sister about a church hidden in the forest, a place he and his friends had stumbled across. They thought it was abandoned, but when they got closer, they saw someone standing at the door, waiting for them. Daniel went back alone that night. He was never seen again. One kid, every few decades, no bodies, no clues, just the bells. And now it was my turn. The first time I heard them again, I convinced myself it was a dream. The second time, I wasn't so sure. And the third time, I knew they were calling to me. It was around midnight when the sound woke me, a deep, low tolling, coming from the woods. Not just the bells now, voices, soft and distant, rising and falling like a chant. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The air felt thick, heavy, like the pressure before a storm. Then I heard footsteps in the hall, slow, uneven. For a moment, I thought it was my dad, maybe up getting a drink. But as the steps passed my door, I caught a glimpse of something through the crack. Bare feet against pale, dark wood. They stopped outside my room, and then in a voice that was thin and stretched too tight, I heard him. It's beautiful, Jake. Carter. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't possible. It wasn't. I forced myself to move, to get up, to reach for the doorknob. My hands were shaking. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, until the first light of dawn broke through my window. Only then did I finally open the door. The hallway was empty, but there, just outside my door, was a single footprint. Wet, dark, leaning back towards the front door. That was 2 nights ago. And now I'm sitting here, writing this, knowing what's coming. Because tonight, the bells are louder, and I think I see something standing at the tree line. I don't remember getting out of bed. One moment, I was staring at the ceiling, listening to the bells. The next, I was standing in my backyard, the wet grass cold under my feet. The forest loomed in front of me, deep and endless. I couldn't see the chapel, but I could feel it, waiting. I took a step forward, then another. I didn't want to go. I knew I didn't. But something was pulling me, the same way it had pulled Carter all those years ago. The whispers rose, the trees swayed, though there was no wind. And then, just beyond the first row of pines, I saw him. Carter. He was standing there, half hidden in the dark. His skin was pale, almost gray. His eyes, God, his eyes, were too big, too black, like the pupils had swallowed everything else. He was smiling, but his lips didn't move when he spoke. Come and see. I took another step. My body wasn't mine anymore. It was just moving. Then, at the last second, something broke through. A sound, sharp and sudden. Mom's voice. She was calling my name from the porch. I turned, just for a moment, just long enough to see her, silhouetted in the doorway, her voice thick with sleep and confusion. And when I looked back, Carter was gone. The bell stopped and I could move again. I ran. That was last night. I haven't slept since. I don't think I can. I don't know what's happening to me. I still hear them, even now, not just at night. The bells ring under my skin, in my bones. I hear them in the silence between words, in the spaces between breaths. They're getting louder and worse. I think I'm seeing things. At work, in the grocery store, in the reflection of my bedroom mirror. Flickers of movement, glimpses of something tall and hooded with too many hands. Always just watching. I think it's waiting for me to come back, and I don't know how much longer I can resist. I went back to the library today, hoping to find something, anything that could help. When I got there, I found out the librarian, the one who had warned me, had died last night. Heart attack, they said, but I didn't believe it. Because when I asked where they found her, the answer sent ice through my veins. Just outside the woods, her footsteps led into the trees, but there were no footprints leading out. I don't know what to do anymore. All I know is that I can't stay here. Not when the bells are ringing. Not when I can hear Carter's voice whispering through the trees, telling me over and over again, "It's beautiful, Jake. Just come and see." But there were no footprints leading out. I stared at the library steps for a long time, listening to the murmur of people around me, their voices distant, muffled, like I was already slipping somewhere else, somewhere beneath the world. The librarian had known something, and now she was gone. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, that people died every day, that it had nothing to do with the chapel in the woods, or the thing with too many hands, or the bells that I could still hear. Even now, beneath the hum of passing cars and the buzz of fluorescent lights. But I knew better. I left the library without speaking to anyone, walking fast, keeping my head down. I thought maybe, if I could just get home, if I could lock the doors and shut the curtains, maybe I could. A shadow moved across the sidewalk ahead of me. I froze. For just a second I saw him. Carter. Standing across the street, perfectly still. The sun was high, but he cast no shadow. His lips moved, but no sound came out. And behind him, in the dark space between two buildings, something taller loomed, something waiting. I turned and ran. I don't remember getting home. One moment, I was sprinting down Main Street, lungs burning, heart hammering against my ribs. The next, I was standing in my bedroom, the walls too close, the air too thick. I locked the door. I locked the windows. I sat on the floor and pressed my hand to my ears, trying to block out the bells, the whispers, the scratching at the edges of my mind. But nothing happened, because I finally understood. The chapel had never really been there, not in the way we think of places. It doesn't exist on maps, or in records, or in the solid, knowable world. It was somewhere else, a thin place, a doorway between here and there, and I had opened it. I had stepped through it all those years ago, and now it would never let me go. It's night now. The house is quiet. The streets outside are empty, but the bells are ringing. Not distant this time, not calling from the woods. They're right outside my window. I don't want to look, can't look, but I can feel them. The presence, the weight of something vast and unseen pressing against the walls, the floors, the space inside my skull. And I know that if I open my curtains, if I step outside, I'll see them waiting for me. Carter, the librarian, the others, and behind them, the thing that watches, the thing that waits. I don't think I can fight it anymore, because the truth is, I never really left the chapel. Not all of me ever left the chapel. Somewhere in the hush between heartbeats, in the breath before a whisper, I am still there, standing before that altar, beneath stained glass that does not tell a story, but only swirls in chaos, colors bleeding like open wounds. Somewhere, the bells are still ringing, and I think they always have been. Even when I ran from the woods, even when I buried Carter in memories too painful to hold, even when I tried to live a life outside of the shadow that followed me home, I think I have always been walking back. Because you cannot close a door that has been opened. You cannot unhear the call. And the watcher in the pines is patient. I do not remember unlocking the door, but I am outside now. The grass is wet beneath my feet, just like the night when Carter walked away, when I stood frozen behind the glass, too afraid to call out to him. The wind carries a smell I know too well. Damp wood, old stone, something rich and sweet and wrong, like decay wrapped in honey. And ahead of me, in a shifting dark, trees part like the Red Sea. The chapel stands where it always has, where it always will. It does not wait for me. It does not need to. Because I was always meant to return. Because I was never truly here to begin with. And oh, how foolish I was to resist. The light beyond the glass. The doors groan open before I can touch them. Inside candles burn, though no one has lit them. The air hums with something more than silence. Something alive. Something ancient. Something that sees me the way a man sees a fly trapped in amber. The pews are filled now. Figures sit with hands folded, heads bowed, skin waxy and stretched too thin. They do not move. They do not breathe. Some I recognize. Some I do not. Carter is in the front row. His eyes are black voids, endless and swallowing, but his lips part in something like a smile. I want to speak. I want to tell him I am sorry. But there are no words here. Only the sound of the bells, and the hands of the thing at the altar, rising to greet me. I step forward, and my reflection steps forward with me. Not in glass, not in mirrors, but in the air itself, in the fabric of the world unraveling at the edges. I see myself not as I was, but as I am, as I always have been. Not a boy, not a man. Something hollow, something waiting to be filled. Something that has already been claimed. The watcher tilts its hooded head and I understand. I see the space left in the pews. I see the candle that bears my name, wick unburned, waiting to be lit. And as I kneel before the altar, as I bow my head, as I let the many hands touch me, shape me, mold me into something I have always been destined to become, I hear Carter's voice, soft and reverent, whispering the final truth. There is no leaving, Jake. There was only ever the road back. And oh, isn't it beautiful? And whoever is reading this, oh, won't you please come and join us? That's it for tonight, folks. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there.